Okay, in terms of stuff, deadlines may not change. So, exam 2 covering part 2, quizzes part 3 covering part 3, deadline November 16th, end of day. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, December 7th, also end of day. For the paper, draft deadline November 9th, because it's Monday, Veterans Day, so no class. When I get drafts, I draft-size them, bring them back, and then also I can leave them in a pickup envelope outside of my door. So if you turn in a draft and you're wondering like where it is, if you go down to second floor, down there, no, not on the floor here, but floor below this one, it'll be in, there's 2 envelopes in the door. One's a drop envelope for dropping stuff off, and then I put the commented versions in the pickup envelope there. Plus our deadline November 14th, emergency deadline for full credit November 21st, and then desperation deadline December 8th, end of day. Before pressing on to our new stuff, any stuff about any previous stuff, or stuff to be, that needs more stuff. Okay, so last time we're looking at our good dead friend John Locke, talking about personal identity, and for Locke, the key to it all is consciousness. And his view of personal identity, again, kind of complicated because he's got the same human being composed of a living body across time, and then of course you've also got a soul going on there, and then somehow in the soul is the person's consciousness. And for Locke, that's the person. And so wherever the consciousness goes, that's where the person goes. Now a critical part of this for Locke is all about reward and punishment, justice and injustice. And his reasoning, laying aside the metaphysics, is pretty commonsensical. Namely, that it's only right to punish someone if they've actually committed a misdeed, and it's only right to reward someone if they're the person that did the meritorious, the good deed. Yeah, the concrete examples, it only makes sense to punish someone for murder if they committed murder. It only makes sense to give someone a prize in literature if they wrote the word that won the prize. Now Locke, again, notes that, kind of harping on it, that it's not sameness of substance. So a person is not the same person across time because the substance is the same, because he thinks in the case of the body, that substance constantly changes. And even in the case of the soul, as we saw, he believed that you might have a recycled soul, that it had a consciousness in it before, that somehow, however that works, gets erased, and then you get a new consciousness in there, and he says that would not be the same person. So, same substance, not the same person. Now, he also allows for, as we saw, kind of strange cases in which you might have the same substance, but different consciousness. And he presents a case, imagine if you had a case where you have Socrates, and there's actually 2 people. There's the awake Socrates and the sleeping Socrates. And it's different, there's 2 consciousnesses trading off. Now his view is that even though they look the same, if Socrates showed up on security cameras, night Socrates, doing various bank heists, etc., they would look like the same person, and it would be the same human. But Locke would say that if they truly did, have different consciousnesses, then they wouldn't be the same person. And it would be no more just to punish, Socrates, day Socrates, for what night Socrates did, than it would be to punish, if you have identical twins, to just punish one of them, because you can't tell them apart. And so his reasoning is that it's not the sameness of substance that matters, it's that sameness of consciousness.
So if he's saying like Socrates was like sleep and he like sleep murder, so like
yeah,
he shouldn't be like convicted because they're 2 different people, waking and sleeping.
yeah. If they were truly separate people, like if they had like a I mean, imagine a case where, sleepwalking would be a case, like where a whole new consciousness takes over, that's, the day person has no awareness of what the night person does, no shared memories. He would say that, to use an analogy he doesn't use, it'd be like if you had, a car and someone like during the day drives it, and does Meals on Wheels, and then at night someone sneaks in and uses it as their murder vehicle. They go around serial killing. And it wouldn't be it wouldn't be the car's fault, and you wouldn't arrest the day driver for what the night driver does, even though you'd see like the same car on the videotapes. Now, whether or not this actually happens, interesting problem. There is actually a real case where someone did go and sleep murder someone, and because they had established that they were on this medication, they had a history of sleep doing stuff, they actually ruled the person did not, there's the person killed, but they ruled the person was not guilty on those grounds. That they didn't say, according to Locke's theory, but they essentially said the person's not responsible for what they do when they're asleep, which is consistent with Locke's view, that it's not you if you don't remember it. And there, of course, is kind of a challenge to trying to establish that, something Locke was aware of even in his time. Which leads us to this exact problem. So, suppose you have, you can take the classic drunk defense that's often used by first-time lawyers. When I was an undergrad, my political science professors talked about how one of his former students went off to law school, and the first case was someone had been out, drinking and committing crimes, and they tried to use the defense the person was too drunk to know what they were doing. So it didn't work out well because they also got charged with drunken disorderly. So he does kind of raise that question: if someone is drunk, why do we punish them if they say they were too drunk to remember? Or what about cases of sleepwalking? Well, as a practical matter, what Locke says is this: we do punishment based not on metaphysical speculation, but based on the courts do it based on what they know. So Locke is aware that his theory says that if you remember, it's you. If you don't remember, it's not you. But then there's a very practical matter of, imagine you've got a court situation and someone's trying the drunk defense. I was too drunk to know what I was doing. It wasn't me. Now Locke says that as a practical matter, the judge and jury can never really know for sure, was the person truly so drunk they don't remember, and would that excuse them? Now in some cases, as a practical matter, people do use the drunk defense. It generally doesn't get people acquitted, like, okay, they're drunk so they get out of everything, but they sometimes will mitigate the punishment to show the person was intoxicated and there was no premeditation. But as Locke notes, that someone typically can't say, oh yeah, it wasn't me, I don't remember it, so I'm innocent. And again, it's a practical matter. The jury and judge can't prove that the person doesn't remember, and the person can't prove that they don't remember. And so they have to go by what the evidence is. So as a practical matter, legal stuff usually goes by not the same metaphysical person, but is it the same human? So if they have like a videotape of someone holding a convenience store, and the person says, I don't remember that, it's not going to go super well for them. But he notes that once the person dies, then God will of course know whether the person remembers or not. And so ultimately, the person may be like convicted or punished under human law, but if they truly don't remember, and it's a different person, Locke believes the person would be, God would know this and find them innocent.
Is that different from like what you were telling us the other day about the man that had dementia and he didn't remember it?
Yeah, good question. Because if you have a case where, in Locke's case, the jury, the person could plausibly be lying. Oh yeah, I'm so drunk, I don't remember, it's not me. But if you have a case where they have dementia, people really can't, a person could kind of pretend to have dementia, but they can actually, do scans of the person's brain and see parts of the brain are just dead. And you can't, it's like trying to fake like a broken leg on an x-ray. You can't. I mean, a person can pretend like their legs hurt, but you can't like fake, you can't like lay there and pretend, you could trick the x-ray into thinking you have a broken leg. Likewise for dementia. The people who want to kill him, they have no doubts that he doesn't remember. And people who defense, they have no doubts. And so in that case, this would be a case where they do admit that this person doesn't remember. Yeah, and so from Locke's view, if they truly don't remember, and this can be proven, then they shouldn't be executed, because they would, on his view, they would not be the person who committed the crime. Now you could make other arguments as to why the person should be executed. You could say that metaphysics doesn't matter, that it doesn't matter if it's a person or not, that someone committed the crime, so someone's gonna, this is the most likely candidate. Or they could argue based on just deterrence. It doesn't matter who you kill, you're just gonna kill someone to send a message. Now, continuing with the memory loss thing, so what if someone loses their memory? Is it the same person? Well, Locke says again that he's got a complicated view. So you've got sameness of human, sameness of soul, sameness of person. So Locke would say if someone loses their memory, they would still be the same human. So his view is not that you switch being human when you forget stuff, but his view is that if you forget things, since a person is their consciousness, they would be different people. And so one implication of this is that we remain the same human throughout our life, but as we forget stuff, one implication would be is we are not the same person. Because what you don't remember, that you permanently lose, would be, it no longer would be you. Now he doesn't go into great detail about this, but in a state it's got to be a permanent loss. So if you like forget your keys for a couple of minutes where you put them, you're like, oh my god, now a new person. But if you permanently forget stuff and can never recover it, he thinks that that's not you. So any permanent gaps in memory, that's not you. Now, how does he support this? Well, this takes us back to the sleepwalking defense, also the insanity defense. Now, as Locke sees it, if someone is insane, then we don't punish them, when they get better, we don't punish them for what they did when they were insane, if we can show they really were insane. And Locke's belief is that this is because we see them as a different person. Now that could be countered. We could say, yeah, they're the same person, but one's, they're insane, and they're not insane, but they're still the same person. Now he also, to support his view, he goes with language, how we talk. Namely, that we do say things like a person is beside themselves or they're not the same person. Like in cases where someone is like getting divorced or breaking up with someone, we'll often say, you're not the person I fell in love with, blah, blah, blah. Now, that could be seen as metaphorical. The person the same person has changed, or it could be taken literally. They are not the same person. Now, arguments from language are kind of weak, because just because we say stuff doesn't mean that this really proves metaphysical truths. I mean, true, we do talk like that. We do talk about people not being the same person, or they're not the person we knew, or they changed much like the same person. But there is the question of, does that show there really is a metaphysically different? And Locke thinks it provides some evidence. So kind of his two arguments for this are legal stuff, that we make this differentiation, and also we talk like that. Or so we learn. Now he finishes up considering some more odd cases. And going back to kind of the night-day Socrates, he asks us to imagine a scenario where you have a person, two people. You have the same human, but then you have a day consciousness and a night consciousness. And there are a few short stories based on this. Typically fairly fantastic because the normal course of it, people don't, have day and night personalities. But of course we do know about multiple personalities. So Locke would have a way of explaining that metaphysically, because if someone truly has multiple people, or there truly are multiple people, you have the same human, same soul, but then you would have multiple consciousness in there, one of which would be in control at any given time. So one way the multiple personalities could be explained from Locke's view is several consciousnesses in there, I guess, vying or competing for control over the body. But Locke asks us to imagine, you've got one body with a day consciousness and a night consciousness. And he says, well, these would be separate people, because for him, it's not the body that makes the person, not the soul that makes the person, it's the consciousness. So wherever that goes, the person goes. So in recap, the key for Locke is this: being the same human is a matter of the body and life. Having the same soul is a matter of, the same substance, but that's not the same person. Being the same person means having the same consciousness. So if your consciousness is lost, you lose memory, you're not that person. And this, of course, has some weird implications. One would be, well, you can imagine a weird case like this, given his view of punishment. Imagine if two people go to commit a terrible crime. They go to do a mass shooting or a terrorist attack. And one terrorist gets killed on the spot. So they're off and God's like, so why are you here? The person's like, well, I just murdered a bunch of people. And they're like, oh, enjoy your time in hell. And the other person gets hit in the head, gets shot in the head, and they have complete amnesia. So they don't remember anything. So, and they later, die of their injuries, but they show up and God says, hey, so why are you here? And he's like, I don't know. I don't remember anything. I say, okay, well, did you do anything bad? I don't remember. They're like, okay, heaven, I guess. And so you can just luck out, So on Locke's view, if someone really believed Locke's view, I guess the thing to do before you die is make sure you erase your memories, because that way you can't get punished for anything. Now maybe God would prevent that workaround. Maybe God would be like, guess what? All the memories back. So I guess maybe God could do that. Now there's also, tied into sort of practical stuff, one of the dream machines of law enforcement is a memory reader. Because if they could just bring people, if they do this in sci-fi, sort of futuristic courtrooms, they bring people in, put a scanner on them, and then scan their memories. The idea being that if a person remembers doing it, then they were probably the one doing it. I mean, you have to sort out dreams and stuff, but that's kind of the idea. And so in a way, Locke's theory does make sense there. If a person remembers doing it, they probably were the one that did it. And then of course Locke died, and is still dead today. Before moving away from Locke to our good dead friend David Hume, anything about Locke that needs more Locke stuff? You can now turn to David Hume. We saw David Hume before. All the stuff we said about before is still true. Was Scottish, died in 1776, still dead today. Now what Hume is doing is he's taking empiricism, that is what you know about the world through your senses, applying it to personal identity, and he thinks he's taking it to sort of its logical conclusion. One thing that Hume saw himself as doing was following up John Locke, but taking empiricism and pushing it, seeing where it would go, because he thinks that Locke didn't take it as far as it should. That he still has stuff in there that shouldn't be in there if you're truly an empiricist. So it begins by looking at other philosophers, people like Locke and Descartes. And he says, these other philosophers imagine that when they look inside, they see a self, a metaphysical self, that exists and continues and has this, simplicity and identity across time. So what Hume does is he essentially says, let's do this empirical stuff. Now, the way you look for the self empirically is sort of a safari in the mind. You would go and look around with your mind's eye to see what you could see. And so what Hume was going to do is poke around in his mind and see what he can see. Again, because he's an empiricist. For him, whatever you can say is real, you have to perceive. Again, typically it's like what's out of the world. In this case, he's looking what's in the inside. So what does he find? Well, and he also says to the reader, as he often does, you can try this yourself. Try it at home. See what you find. And he says whenever he looks around in his mind's eye, he doesn't find a simple continuing self. What he finds is always a perception. Now, a perception for him is, well, we're all experiencing it. It is, I'll use some metaphors. One way to think of a perception would be, I guess in the simplest form, if you think of like a, if you ever worked with like a painting program, like Microsoft Paint, for example, or Photoshop, and if you zoom in, super zoom, you get down to like a pixel level, where you just see like these little, you can actually see the little colored squares. So one way you can think of is each of those little squares would be like, if you're looking at an object, looking visually, each of those squares would be like the smallest perception, the smallest bit of visual data. Or if you want to make it, you know, sort of less extreme, you could say a perception would be like a single, to use a metaphor, like a single photograph. And if you have, you know, going would be like a film strip. You know, so if you think of a film strip with each of the cells in it, that visual thing would be like a perception, you know, the slice of time. And then of course you'd also have audio perceptions, and that would be like bits of whatever the smallest bit of sound is, like a note or something. And then of course you'd also have tactile ones, you know, touching stuff, etc. And so each perception would be kind of like again, the clearest examples would be like a visual image, or audio image, or like a tactile, you know, sensation. And so Hume, as he sees it, when he goes and looks around in his mind, all he finds are stuff like that, like a feeling of like a small itch on his left little toe, or a slight discomfort, you know, in his right arm, or you know, a image of a grasshopper, or whatever's in there. And we can do this ourselves. You just go around your mind and you just kind of stream of consciousness, and all kinds of stuff will pop in there. So each thing that pops in there, perception. So Hume says, when he's poking around in there, he's never without a perception. There's always something going on. And there's nothing but perceptions. That's all he finds. So no matter where he looks, you know, he can picture him kind of like, you know, in a, mentally speaking, like in a big ball pit, like in Chuck E. Cheese, and everything he's grabbing is, you know, each ball is like a perception. It's like perception, perception, perception. It's all perceptions. And he thinks that if all his perceptions were taken away, like at death, then he would cease to be. So, badly drawn. In a way, what he thinks is going on is this. He sees, looking in his mind, all these perceptions. And so this might be like a visual perception, this may be the feeling of like sensation of hunger, this might be the itchy feeling on his left big toe, this may be like the chirp of a cricket, and then so on for everything that's going on in the mind. So the perceptions would be all those things that are going on. Now Hume says, again, try this at home, see what you find. And he does consider that maybe other people are radically different from him. So someone else may go in there and see that continuing self. But Hume says, in his own case, he doesn't see any of that. He doesn't see the thing Descartes claimed or Locke claimed. He just sees, you know, just all these perceptions just flooding through the stream of consciousness. And so it's a pretty fair point. He says, you know, take a look. What do you find? So then, what is a person going to be on his view? Well, being an empiricist, he thinks that the only evidence you have for stuff is empirical. In this case, it's not with your outer senses, but your inner senses. And so he says this, all that he encounters are perceptions. And so a person for him at this point is just a bundle of perceptions. So one way you can think of it metaphorically, since these things are in perpetual change, perpetual flux, kind of like if you're doing dishes, you get all the bubbles. There's bubbles forming and popping and forming and popping. That could be like a metaphor for the person. Or if you want another metaphor, at any moment in time, it'd be like a bunch of, well, like a Chuck E. Cheese ball pit. You know, just a bunch of balls just all, you know, together in a bundle. Or any round objects, you know, that would be kind of like together.
Is that where you get like when people say that the same person is like ugly or beautiful, the perception of the two different people?
Oh, Hume, yeah, Hume also, because he does have a theory of beauty, we don't talk about in this class, but he also thinks that our conception of beauty on one hand is relative like that people, so your perceptions would be different from other people, and the beauty, for him, beauty is how you feel about your perception. So you would have a perception of someone or something, and if you felt a certain way, you'd say beautiful. Someone else could look at the same person and have a perception, you know, very similar to yours, but they would not see it as beautiful. I mean, to use like a, I guess kind of a camera analogy, you kind of think of beauty as like a filter you put over stuff. If you're both taking a picture of something, if you thought it was beautiful, you're kind of putting on your beauty filter saying, wow, that's beautiful. Then the person is not, you know, like, not beautiful. Yes, he also does think that each person's perceptions are different. Now he thinks, and a key part of his view is, this is constantly changing. And again, one metaphor would be, think of like, you know, the soap bubbles in the sink, you know, forming and popping and forming and popping, or like boiling water, you know, where it's just boiling, you know, and bubbles are forming and breaking, etc. And so it's constantly changing. And so at any given moment, you have a snapshot of what's going on, but the next moment it would be different. And this is, of course, what we experience. For example, when you're looking around the room, your perceptions are changing as you look. What you're hearing is constantly changing, what you're feeling is constantly changing. And if you even if you close your eyes and try to block out everything, stuff will just keep rushing into your consciousness and just, you know, running in there. And so his view is, so at this point, what is a person? A person is a bundle of perceptions. These constantly change, and they're never the same. So any given, you know, whatever the smallest unit of time is, every unit of time, there's a difference. Now, he then turns to a metaphor or analogy. He says that he quickly kind of ends up blowing up. And so, in a way, he brings it up to just to destroy it. So he says the mind is a kind of theater, a stage upon which the perceptions appear and, you know, then do their thing and leave. Again, we could also use the analogy of the Chuck E. Cheese ball pit. You know, the mind is like a ball pit, and all of those perceptions are in there. Now, he says that across, contrary to Locke and Descartes and others, he says there's no simplicity. What does that mean? Well, for some thinkers, I'll just draw it as a circle, the self is a single continuing thing, and it's got no parts. Our good dead friend Leibniz, for example, had this view. He said the mind hasn't got any parts to it. So it's somehow got like all kinds of stuff going on inside of it, but it's got no parts. So I'm not sure how that works, but that's what he claims. And so for Leibniz, yeah, your thoughts and feelings and stuff change, but the you that is you never does. Or if you believe in the soul, like Descartes did, your soul, you know, all kinds of different stuff goes on in the soul, but your soul is always you. It doesn't, the soul itself doesn't change. Now for Hume though, it's not a simple continuing thing. Again, it's like all those perceptions. So it's like a bunch of bubbles. And it's not the same thing across time. So constantly changing, he claims, and it's not identical. So if you were so able to have like a person, metaphysical camera, and a picture of person's perceptions, each unit of time it'd be different. They wouldn't look the same. Now, his comparison to a theater, again, he brings it up and says, the mind is like a theater where these perceptions appear. Then he kind of blows that up. He says, well, we have no idea like what the stage is or what the setup is. And what he ends up kind of doing is just totally destroying the metaphor. To use an analogy, it'd be kind of like saying that the mind is like a projector. These are like the perceptions type of deal. But then he say take away the projector, take away the screen and the wall, and leave the projection. That's kind of what he's got going. And of course it'd constantly be changing. So he says it's kind of like a theater, but then he ends up saying, but yeah, this is terrible, terrible metaphor, just, we have no idea why. But then, of course, he runs into, a problem, because he's trying to find out how personal identity works, and then he says, well, you just got this bundle of perceptions that constantly changes, and so he tries to address this problem of what is it to be the same person across time. Now, his approach to philosophy is kind of unusual. Most philosophers who do metaphysics and philosophy are trying to say things like, what is a person? What is personal identity? And what Hume is doing is, he does it here and does it with other stuff. In a way, he's doing more what we consider today psychology. So his question is not so much, what is the person? Because he says it's just a bundle of perceptions, and doesn't seem to be an identity there. But he switches to the question of not, what is the identity that makes the person, to the psychological question. What causes us to ascribe identity to this? In other words, why do we think that? To use a metaphor, what I always use for Hume's approach is this. Imagine you were a psychiatrist, and some parents come in with their kid, Timmy, and Timmy thinks he's got a monster in his closet. Now, as a psychiatrist, would you take out your big tome of monsters and go through to find out what is the beast in the closet? So so that way you could go, and show up just as the sun is going down, of course, and fight the monster in the closet. No, you would inquire, what is this monster, Timmy? So I may, as they say in Supernatural, how do we kill it? No, you wouldn't say, what is the monster in the closet? You would ask the question, why does Timmy think he's got a monster in the closet? Because your assumption is there's the monster. And so in a way, that's what Hume's doing. He's not asking, what is the monster in the closet? He's saying, why do we think there's a monster in the closet? So his question about identity here is not, what is it that makes the identity, but why do we think there is? Which is more a question of psychology. So he kind of jumps from metaphysics to psychology. Now, why does he ask this? Well, because he thinks that there really is no identity. Because, as he's claimed, what we've got going on from moment to moment is different bundles of perceptions, which are identical. So, no identity between them. So every perception is distinct, but we suppose, when we talk about personal identity, when we say things like, I'm the same person, or when Friday comes around and you say, yep, that's my paycheck, when you attribute identity, that we think we are the same, literally the same, identical person. So what he says what we do is, we suppose that these perceptions are somehow united by identity, and we attribute identity to them. To use a metaphor, as Hume sees it, each moment of our perceptions could be seen like a single pearl or bead. And each one is totally different and totally separate. And Hume says that's the facts. But of course, what we think is, I mean, to use a very practical example, suppose you get paid on Friday, you don't show up on Friday and say, can I have my pay for the work I did, and I'm not the same person from second to second, so can I have my 1 second pay? Oh no, you expect your pay for the whole week, because you say that's all you. And so the question is, what ties it together? Now, what Hume says we do is psychologically, we, effectively imagine a string that makes the beads into a necklace. But he claims there really is no string. So how do we think up this string? Well, he claims when you've got stuff and you want to relate it, he claims there are three relations: resemblance, which is being alike; contiguity, which is proximity in space or time; and causation, one thing causing another. Now, he claims that contiguity wouldn't be a factor here, because, well, in a way, you're always in the same space as yourself. But he thinks the important thing here would be resemblance and also causation. So what he thinks we do, essentially, is we, again, kind of imagine this connection. So how do we do it? Well, here's how it goes. Much like Locke, he turns to memory. But unlike Locke, he doesn't take memory to be the person. He thinks that memory is how we get this notion of identity. So here's how it goes. What we do is, first off, we use memory and resemblance together. How so? Well, what we do is this. If this is a person right now, and they wonder, am I the same person who was here, 10 minutes ago? And what they do is look back at their memories, and they would see that even though, if they look around the room, each perception is not identical, they notice that there's resemblance. So what's happening here resembles here, etc. So you can draw a resemblance from memory between them. To use an analogy, if you take like a video and load it up into some video editing software, and most of them still use the kind of the cell metaphor from back when film was actual film. And if you look at the different cells, you'll see that each one is going to be, if you're moving the camera around, each one will be slightly different, because things are moving, you're moving the camera, etc. But you'll notice that each one resembles, unless you do like a quick cut, each one resembles the previous one. And so what you do is you take them all together as one scene based on their resemblance. And so what Hume says is that what we do is this. We look at our memories going back. We notice, there's a lot of resemblance between them. So what we do is we imagine that there is the string connecting the beads, because the beads are alike, and so we say, aha, they're connected. It's not just all these separate perceptions, just like beads loose and like floating in space. They're connected together. So once you have memory and you see the resemblance between the perceptions, according to Hume, you would say, aha, I see the resemblance, and so you would claim that the string is the you that ties them all together. So that's memory and resemblance. What about causation? Well, Hume brings up another analogy, specifically one to a commonwealth, to a country. Now, he says the mind is, again, the system of perceptions. And you can also look at it in terms of perceptions linked by cause and effect. So here's your previous perceptions, current ones, past ones, so on and so forth, all the way back. So then, what is it? What here is the thread that connects them together? Well, causation. And he uses the analogy to a republic. And we can use, you can use the United States. The United States goes back to, well, you can trace it back to 1776, Declaration of Independence, or 1789, the ratification of the Constitution, depending on how we want to date it, but over 200 years. Now, do we have the same people we had back then? No. The land is not the same. 13 colonies, now we have 50 states. The laws, we have a lot more laws, so lots change. But we still say it's the same country, still the United States. And according to Hume, the way this is done is you'd say that you have the past connected to now by cause and effect. So you take the laws and show how the laws of today, all the amendments to the Constitution trace back to the original document. You can show how like the 13, what we have today, 50 states, traces back to the 13 colonies, and so on for all the stuff. So by analogy, he says, you can take your perception right now, right here, right now, and then trace it all the way back, to the beginning, from, cause and effect. So that way you could, just as the United States can be said to be, over 200 years old, you can say you're X number of years old based on that causal connection going back. So in that case, the cause and effect is the string that ties together the beads, that makes the necklace that is you. Or so he claims. Now, much like Locke, his concern about personal identity in many ways is practical. Namely, our worry, our concern about our identity, again, is not really like an abstract metaphysical thing for the most part. People typically will wake up and say, gosh, am I the same person that I was? What are the metaphysics of personal identity? I cannot sleep until I solve all these problems. Only philosophers do that. What people worry about, of course, is our concerns about happiness and misery. Like, what's going to happen to them in the future? What happened to them in the past? And so, as a practical matter, that's what concerns us. That's what, it's our passions that tie it together. Now, going back to memory and Locke, as we saw with Locke, roughly put, you are your memory. Hume, though, disagrees with this. Again, he thinks memory is important, but he thinks memory is how we get the notion of identity, but it's not what makes our identity. I mean, to use an analogy, you may recognize a person because of a particular hat they wear, for example. But of course, that's how you initially recognize them. But of course, you wouldn't think that they are their hat. So Hume thinks that memory is how we get the notion of identity, but memory is not the identity. Why do we need memory? Well, again, for the resemblance thing, to have that thread. Also for causation. If we had no memory at all, we wouldn't understand causation. So, got to have memory. But he thinks, contrary to Locke, that you are not your memory. Why not? Well, he points out, kind of the obvious. Our memory is full of holes. We try to remember back to, what was said during the course of this class. Even I don't remember what was said. If someone said, "What did you say this time?" I'd say some stuff. Yeah, and so we forget stuff all the time. Our memory is full of gaps. And so we'd have to say that if we are remembering, we're constantly not the same person. But intuitively, he's basically doing an argument by intuition, we believe that we were and did things and so forth, even though we don't remember. That we can acknowledge that we forgot things, but that we did them. So there's all kinds of gaps in our memory between when we, our first memory and now, but we don't think that we were like going in and out of existence. We just think, yeah, I just forgot. So he ends up rejecting the memory theory of personal identity on the grounds of intuition, that intuitively we believe that just because we forget it's still us. Next time we'll finish up the last of Hume, where he goes totally off the rails, and then more stuff. So good rest of the day, and I'll see you, if you are still you, on Friday.